My wife scolded me after I told her and his brother who lives with us that he had to cut expenses. It was a Sunday dinner, nothing special. On the calendar, just the kind of evening where the house smells like onions and garlic, and everyone pretends we're still the kind of family that talks about normal things. My wife moved around the kitchen with quick, efficient motions. Her younger brother, Daniel, sat at the table scrolling through his phone, one ankle resting on his knee like he owned the place. My son, Eli, was on the floor with his toy cars, making quiet engine noises that filled the gaps no one else seemed interested in filling. Daniel had been living with us for 11 months. What started as a few weeks until I get back on my feet slowly became a permanent arrangement no one officially agreed to. He didn't pay rent. He ordered takeout most nights. Packages with his name on them showed up at the door more often than our mail. I stood by the sink drying dishes that were already dry, working up the nerve to say something I should have said months ago. "I need to talk about the bills," I said finally, keeping my voice even. "Things are tighter than they look." My wife didn't turn around. "We're fine." "We're not," I said. "Mortgage went up. Groceries too, utilities. I've been moving money around to cover it." Daniel sighed loudly like I'd interrupted something important. "You don't have to make it a big deal." "I'm not," I said. "I just think we all need to cut back a bit, especially on extras." My wife turned then, not confused, not surprised, just annoyed. "Are you seriously doing this right now?" she asked. "Doing what?" "Making him feel unwelcome in his own family's home." I blinked at that, his home. "I'm not saying he has to leave," I said carefully. "Just fewer deliveries, maybe chip in for groceries, something." Daniel laughed under his breath. Not loud, just enough. My wife wiped her hands on a towel, jaw tight. "He's trying. You know, he's had a rough year." "I know," I said. "But so have we." That was when she said it. Quiet, sharp like a paper cut. "You're always worried about money. It's embarrassing." The word hung in the air. Embarrassing. Eli's toy car stopped moving on the floor. Daniel didn't look up from his phone. And my wife, the person who used to squeeze my hand under restaurant tables when we couldn't afford dessert, just shook her head like I was a disappointment she was tired of explaining. No one defended me. That was the part I felt later lying awake. Not the words, the silence. That night, after dishes were done and Daniel had retreated to the guest room, his room now, I sat on the edge of our bed. "I didn't mean to embarrass you," I said. She kept folding laundry. "You always make everything about scarcity. It's exhausting. I'm trying to keep us safe." "We're not poor," she said like the word itself offended her. I looked at the stack of unpaid bills in my desk drawer. The second credit card I'd opened and not told her about. The way I'd started skipping lunch at work. I wanted to say all that. Instead, I nodded. That was the moment I realized something had shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just a quiet rearranging of where I stood in my own house. 2 weeks later, the power company sent a shut-off warning. I didn't show her. I called and arranged a payment plan instead. That night at dinner, Daniel complained that the Wi-Fi was slow. My wife told me we should upgrade the plan. I said nothing. Eli watched my face like he was trying to learn a language. The breaking point came on a Thursday. I told them both, calmly, at the table, that we couldn't afford Daniel's car insurance anymore. I'd been covering it without saying so. Daniel stared at me. "You never said that was a problem." "I shouldn't have to," I said. My wife's chair scraped back. "Unbelievable." "I'm being honest." "You're being small," she snapped. "Keeping score over family." "Family." I looked at Eli. He was very still. "I'm not keeping score," I said quietly. "I'm trying to keep the lights on." She didn't yell. That would have been easier. She just looked at me like I'd failed some test I didn't know I was taking. "If this is how you feel," she said, "maybe you should take a break and clear your head." I waited for her to soften. to say she didn't mean it. She didn't. Daniel stood up, muttered something about going out, and grabbed his keys. Eli's small voice came from the table. "Is Dad coming back?" No one answered him. So I did. "I don't know yet, buddy." I packed a duffel bag and left after Eli went to bed. Or I thought he had. When I opened the front door, he was standing there in his pajamas holding his sneakers. "I want to come too," he said. My wife called from the hallway, "Eli, go back to bed." He didn't move. I looked at her. She looked away first. "5 minutes," I said. "Let me talk to him." We sat in the car in the driveway, engine off. "Are you mad?" he asked. "No. Mom is. Sometimes grown-ups get scared and it comes out sideways," I said. He nodded like that made sense. "Are we poor?" he asked. I swallowed. "We're careful." He thought about that. Then, "I don't need new shoes." I laughed, but it came out broken. "You're not the problem, Eli." "I know," he said. "It's Uncle Daniel." I didn't correct him. We ended up in a grocery store parking lot that night. I couldn't afford a hotel without using the last of the credit. Eli slept curled against the door, jacket over him. I stayed awake, watching my breath fog the windshield. It was cold, uncomfortable, quiet, but for the first time in months my chest didn't feel tight. There was nothing left to juggle. Nothing left to pretend. Just me, my son, and the truth. The call came the next morning from a number I didn't recognize. A lawyer. My father's lawyer. My dad had died 3 years earlier. We hadn't been close at the end. Pride runs stubborn in men who grew up with nothing. The lawyer said there was a trust. Small but steady. My father had built it slowly, quietly. Over decades of fixing engines and saving scraps of paychecks. He left instructions, the lawyer said. It was to go to you once you demonstrated financial responsibility under strain. I laughed softly. That's specific. He wrote, the man continued. When he chooses dignity over appearances, give it to him. I couldn't speak. Eli stirred beside me. It wasn't a fortune. It wasn't a rescue helicopter. But it was enough to breathe. Enough to stop drowning. I didn't go home that day. I took Eli to breakfast instead. Real plates, warm food. Are we okay? He asked. We are now, I said. Not because of the money. Because I finally understood something my father never knew how to say. Providing isn't about looking strong. It's about being honest when things are hard, even if people misunderstand you. Especially then. I don't know what happens with my marriage. I don't know if Daniel ever figures things out. What I do know is this. I wasn't small for worrying about the bills. I wasn't weak for wanting balance. I was carrying more than anyone saw, and I carried it quietly, because that's what love looked like to me. Maybe I should have spoken sooner. Maybe silence can be its own kind of mistake. But that night in the car, with my son choosing to sit beside me in the cold, instead of in a warm house where I didn't belong, I learned something no argument could teach. Respect isn't demanded in loud voices. It's revealed in who stays when comfort leaves. And whatever comes next, I know who I am now. Not embarrassing. Not small. Just a man who finally stopped confusing silence with peace. The money from my father's trust didn't feel like winning. It felt like being seen. Years too late. I didn't tell my wife right away. Not out of spite. I just needed time where every decision wasn't an argument waiting to happen. Eli and I stayed with an old coworker of mine for a few days. A pull-out couch. Shared bathroom. The kind of place where no one pretends to be anything they're not. It was quiet there. No tension humming through the walls. No careful stepping around someone else's pride. Just space to think. And in that space, memories started coming back, and the kind I hadn't let myself sit with in years. My father never talked about money. He just moved like someone who understood what it meant to not have it. He saved rubber bands, washed aluminum foil to reuse, Drove the same truck for 22 years. When I was 12, I asked him why we never went on vacations like other families. He said, "Because I'm building something you can't see yet." I thought that meant a house. Or a business. Turns out it meant a safety net made of discipline, but he never explained it. And I grew up thinking love was supposed to look quieter than it actually is, so I became him in ways I didn't notice. I carried stress alone. I hid struggle so no one else would feel it. I thought that was strength. What I didn't see was how silence can turn into distance, and distance into misunderstanding. My wife called on the 4th day. "Eli wants to come home," she said. I looked at him across the room building a tower out of mismatched blocks. "Do you?" I asked. He shrugged. "Only if you come too." I told her we'd talk that evening. When we met at a coffee shop, she looked tired. Not angry, just worn thin. "I didn't know it was that bad," she said. I tried to say, "You made it sound like inconvenience." "Not drowning." I nodded. That was fair. She stared into her cup. "Daniel moved out yesterday." That surprised me. Why? He said he didn't want to cause problems. We both knew that wasn't the real reason. The real reason was that once the person carrying the weight drops it, everyone else suddenly feels how heavy things are. "I've been thinking," she said, "about what you said, about some embarrassment." I didn't rescue her from the word. "I was wrong," she said quietly. "I think I've been scared of slipping backward, of looking like we failed." "We didn't fail," I said. "We just stopped being honest." That was the truest thing I'd said in years. We didn't hug, didn't cry. This wasn't that kind of moment. It was two people sitting across from each other, finally speaking at the same level instead of over each other's fears. I told her about the trust. She covered her mouth. "Your dad?" "Yeah." "What are you going to do?" "Stabilize things. Pay off debt. Nothing flashy." She nodded. That answer seemed to calm her more than any number could. Moving back home felt different. Not triumphant. Not awkward. Just reset. Daniel's room was empty except for a dent in the mattress and a charger he forgot to take. Eli helped me carry groceries in that first night. Generic brands, coupons, the usual. "Are we still careful?" he asked. "Always," I said. He smiled like that was good news. The real change wasn't in the bank account. It was in the conversations. I showed her the bills now. All of them. No shielding. No quiet juggling. She didn't like seeing the numbers. But she stayed at the table. That mattered more than agreement. A month later, I got a letter from the lawyer. Inside was a copy of my father's handwritten note. The last line said, "He'll think I was hard on him. I just needed him to be strong enough to choose right when it's lonely." I sat with that for a long time, because that's what it had been. Lonely. Not dramatic, not explosive. Just the quiet loneliness of being the only one saying, "We can't afford to pretend." I don't tell this story like I was some hero. I waited too long to speak clearly. I let resentment grow where conversation should have been. But I also know this now. I wasn't small for worrying about money. I wasn't controlling for wanting balance. I was protecting our future the only way I knew how. By carrying weight without applause. And yeah, that kind of strength is easy to misunderstand. It doesn't look impressive. It looks like someone saying no when everyone else wants comfort. It looks like being the boring one at the table. It looks like embarrassment until the lights almost go out. Eli still sits next to me sometimes when we eat. Not because he has to, just because he does. And every now and then he'll say, "We're okay, right?" And I tell him the truth. We are because we talk now. That's the real inheritance my father left me. Not money, not rescue, just the understanding that dignity isn't loud, and it isn't always appreciated in the moment, but it lasts longer than pride. And when everything else gets stripped away, comfort, approval, appearances, The people who choose to stand beside you in the cold. That's your real wealth. Coming back home didn't fix everything. It just made the silence different. Daniel's room stayed empty for a while. Not out of respect. More like no one wanted to deal with what it represented. A year of pretending help didn't have a cost. My wife and I moved around each other carefully those first weeks. Not cold, not warm. Like two people learning the layout of a house after the lights come back on. One evening she sat across from me at the kitchen table while we went over the budget. Real numbers. No rounding down, no hiding. She stared at the grocery total. We really spent that much? Yeah. On just living? Yeah. She leaned back, exhaled slowly. Not defensive. Just absorbing it. I thought you were panicking, she said. I didn't realize you were calculating. That sentence meant more to me than an apology would have. Eli adjusted the fastest. Kids don't hold grudges about pride or embarrassment. They just want to know where they stand. One night while I was tucking him in, he asked, "Are we still careful?" "Always," I said. He nodded, satisfied. "That's good. Careful people don't get surprised." I smiled in the dark. Sometimes they still do. "Yeah," he said, pulling the blanket up. But not as bad. I stayed sitting there after he fell asleep, listening to his breathing, realizing he hadn't been scared of having less. He'd been scared of not understanding what was happening. And that part had been on me. A month later, a small envelope arrived from the lawyer. Inside was the final paperwork closing out my father's trust. At the bottom was a copy of one more note, scribbled in the margin of an old form. "Don't rescue him too early. Let him learn he can stand it." I ran my thumb over the ink for a long time. I used to think my father's quietness meant distance. Now I see it was just the only language he knew for love, preparation. He didn't leave me comfort. He left me endurance. Things with my wife didn't magically return to how they were. In some ways, that was the point. We stopped pretending we were the couple who never struggled. We stopped measuring success by what it looked like from the outside. One night she said, "I think I was more afraid of feeling poor than of actually being in trouble." I nodded. "I was more afraid of failing you than of burning out." We sat with that. Two fears. Same house. Never introduced her. We started doing small things differently. Cooking at home became normal, not a temporary fix. Big purchases required a conversation, not an assumption. And when something felt tight, we said the word tight. But now it meant let's look together. Not don't worry about it. That was the real change. Not the money from my father. The visibility. I ran into Daniel once, months later, at a hardware store. He looked thinner, humbled in a way life teaches without speeches. "Hey," he said. "Hey, I didn't realize how much you were covering," he admitted. "I thought you just didn't like me being there." "I didn't like being scared and not saying it," I replied. He nodded. That was enough. We didn't hug. We didn't fix everything. But we stood there like two men who finally understood the weight of what hadn't been said. Sometimes I still think about that night in the car. The cold, the quiet. Eli's small body curled under my jacket. It was the lowest point, and also the clearest, because when everything else fell away, pride, appearances, comfort, what remained was simple. I wanted to be a man my son could trust when things got hard. Not flashy, not impressive, steady. I tell this story now because silence almost rewrote who I was. It almost convinced me that being responsible was the same as being small. That saying "we can't afford this" was something to be ashamed of. It isn't. There is dignity in limits. There is love in planning. There is strength in being the one who worries quietly so others can rest, as long as you don't disappear while doing it. That's the part I had to learn. Strength doesn't mean carrying everything alone. It means telling the truth before the weight turns into distance. Eli doesn't remember the parking lot much, but sometimes, when we pass that grocery store, he says, That's where we had our car sleepover. Like it was an adventure. I don't correct him, because in a strange way it was. That was the night I stopped trying to look strong and started being honest instead. I didn't win anything. Didn't prove anyone wrong. I just finally understood my father, my wife, myself. And now when I sit at the table and say, we need to cut back a little, there's no embarrassment in my voice. Just truth. And that's enough. And maybe that's what life really is. We don't become strong by winning big battles. We become strong by telling small truths, especially the ones that make us feel exposed when we say them. I didn't tell this story to sound like a hero. I was just a man who learned a little late that silence doesn't protect a family. Honesty does. If you've ever been in a place where you had to choose between keeping the peace and telling the truth, just remember, silence isn't always peace. Sometimes it's just distance growing quietly between people who love each other. Talking is uncomfortable, but it's also what keeps homes from falling apart. It's what keeps relationships real. And sometimes, it's what helps you finally meet yourself. If this story meant something to you, take a second to hit the like button. It helps real stories like this reach more people who might need them. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever been in a moment where telling the truth felt harder than staying quiet? And if you connect with honest, grounded stories about real life, real families, and quiet strength, go ahead and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next one. Because strength isn't loud. It isn't flashy. Sometimes, it's just a person deciding to stop hiding the truth, and that's more powerful than it looks. I'll see you in the next story.